Hey everyone, tonight we explore a world where the relentless march of time and the fires of human conflict took a different turn. Imagine, if you will, a beacon of knowledge, not extinguished by flame and neglect, but shining ever brighter through the centuries. We're venturing into a reality where the greatest repository of ancient wisdom, the legendary Library of Alexandria, survived. What kind of world would we inhabit if its countless scrolls, its profound insights, and its boundless potential had continued to illuminate the path of human civilization? Before we fully immerse ourselves in this unfolding narrative, if you find yourself drawn to these whispered histories and alternate pathways of humanity, consider hitting that like button and perhaps subscribing. But only if this journey genuinely resonates with you. And as you settle in, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there for you right now. It's always fascinating to imagine us all, across different time zones and distances, sharing these quiet moments together. In our own timeline, the fate of the Library of Alexandria is shrouded in tragedy and debate, a symbol of lost knowledge and human folly. But in this alternate reality, the grand institution, the Mausian, and its sprawling collection, never faced the cataclysmic destruction so often attributed to Caesar's fires, nor the gradual decay and intellectual apathy that followed. Instead, a series of subtle shifts, small turns in the river of history, preserved its light. The first crucial divergence occurred not with a grand act of heroism, but with a nuanced political maneuver. When Julius Caesar found himself embroiled in the Alexandrian War in 48 BC, the fires that ravaged the harbor and, by some accounts, part of the library were averted. In this reality, Caesar, ever the pragmatist, prioritized the preservation of the city's intellectual heart above all else. His forces, instead of using the library's proximity to the harbor as a strategic advantage for burning ships, were given explicit orders to safeguard it. Perhaps it was Cleopatra's shrewd counsel, her understanding of the library's immense value as a symbol of Egyptian power and enlightenment, that swayed him. Or perhaps a small, unrecorded shift in the winds carried the embers away from its precious scrolls. Regardless, the great Pergamene scrolls, gifted by Antony, still found their way into its hallowed halls, complementing its already vast holdings rather than replacing lost ones. The library, therefore, continued to thrive under Roman rule, evolving rather than faltering. The Roman emperors, recognizing its prestige and utility, poured resources into its maintenance and expansion. Unlike the fragmented collections that would emerge in later empires, Alexandria remained the undisputed center. Scribes, scholars, and philosophers from across the vast Roman Empire flocked to its grand halls. The papyrus industry in Egypt, already robust, experienced an even greater boom, fueled by the insatiable demand of the library's ongoing acquisition and copying efforts. New wings were added, not just for scrolls, but for codices. As the format slowly gained prominence, the transition from scroll to bound book was not a hesitant, piecemeal affair, but a deliberate and well-funded initiative led by the library itself, ensuring that ancient texts were systematically transcribed into the more durable and accessible format. This foresight meant that when the political landscape shifted, the knowledge was already more resilient. The rise of Christianity, a period of immense intellectual and religious upheaval in our history, also played out differently. In this timeline, the library, far from being seen as a pagan relic to be purged, became a crucible of intellectual discourse. Early Christian theologians, many of them highly educated, found in its vast collection not just the works of pagan philosophers, but also the rich tapestry of Jewish scholarship and early Christian writings. Debate, often fierce but largely intellectual, unfolded within its walls. The library's immense resources allowed for the comparative study of religious texts, fostering a more nuanced understanding and, perhaps, preventing some of the dogmatic rigidity that characterized later periods. Scholars like Origen, instead of facing persecution and the destruction of their works, had their writings carefully preserved and debated within the library's scholarly framework. The Council of Nicaea still happened, but its theological pronouncements were perhaps more informed by a wider range of textual evidence, leading to subtle but significant differences in the development of Christian doctrine. As the Roman Empire began its long, slow decline in the West, Alexandria, situated in the relatively more stable East, continued to flourish. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, saw the library not as a rival, but as a prestigious jewel in its intellectual crown. Emperors like Justinian, rather than closing philosophical schools in Athens, actively supported and funded the library, recognizing its role in preserving classical learning and contributing to legal and administrative scholarship. The Corpus Juris Civilis, Justinian's monumental legal code, was meticulously compiled and cross-referenced with the aid of the library's vast legal collections, making it even more comprehensive and intellectually robust. Greek, the language of the library and the Eastern Empire, became the lingua franca of scholarship across the Mediterranean. Further solidifying the library's central role, the Arab conquests, a transformative period in the 7th century, represent another critical juncture where our realities diverge. In our world, the story goes that Amr ibn al-As, the Arab general, was famously told to burn the library's books by Caliph Omar, who allegedly stated that if the books agreed with the Koran, they were superfluous, and if they disagreed, they were heretical. In this alternate history, however, the intellectual tradition of Islam, already deeply rooted in the pursuit of knowledge and the reverence for scripture, found a different interaction with Alexandria. Perhaps it was the influence of scholars within Amr's own ranks, or perhaps a more pragmatic approach by the Caliphate, recognizing the sheer scale and value of the library. Instead of destruction, the new Arab rulers saw the library as a colossal prize, a resource to be exploited and integrated. Arab scholars, already eager students of Greek philosophy and science, found in Alexandria a boundless treasure trove. The library was not burned, but instead, its resources were turned towards translation on an unprecedented scale. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which in our timeline was a beacon of intellectual activity, still emerged, but it did so in close collaboration with the Library of Alexandria. Instead of independently rediscovering and translating Greek texts, Baghdad benefited from the centuries of accumulated Alexandrian scholarship. The best translators from both centers worked in tandem, creating a synergy that accelerated the transmission of knowledge. Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Euclid, Ptolemy, their works were not just translated, but meticulously cross-referenced, annotated, and debated. This deep engagement led to an even more rapid and profound advancement in fields like medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy within the Islamic world. This continuous flow of knowledge meant that the Islamic Golden Age, already brilliant in our history, became even more luminous. Innovations in algebraic optics and chemistry occurred earlier and were more widely disseminated. The concept of zero Arabic numerals and advanced astronomical instruments became standard tools for scholars not just in the Islamic world but eventually across Europe, which was less intellectually isolated than in our timeline. The library, now under Arab patronage, became a truly multicultural institution. Scholars from Persia, India, and even the fringes of Europe came to study and contribute. Manuscripts in Arabic, Syriac, and eventually Latin were added to the Greek and Egyptian papyri, The library became a living testament to the idea that knowledge transcends linguistic and religious boundaries. The Crusades, rather than being purely destructive encounters, also took on a different character. European crusaders, instead of merely laying siege to cities, encountered a vibrant intellectual hub in Alexandria. While conflict still existed, the presence of such an undeniable center of learning fostered a reluctant respect. European scholars, accompanying the crusading armies or visiting during periods of truce, were astonished by the depth and breadth of Alexandrian knowledge. They brought back not just tales of war, but copies of translated texts, sparks that ignited the slow burn of the European Renaissance much earlier. The library's uninterrupted existence also profoundly impacted the European Renaissance itself. Instead of piecemeal rediscoveries of classical texts, the full breadth of ancient Greek and Roman thought, alongside the extensive commentaries and advancements of Islamic scholars, was available. Thinkers like Erasmus, Petrarch, and later, the luminaries of the scientific revolution had access to a far more complete and integrated body of knowledge. The work of rediscovery was less about finding lost fragments and more about building upon an already established, immense foundation. This continuous stream of knowledge had a direct and profound impact on the development of science and technology. The meticulous astronomical observations preserved and extended at Alexandria, combined with sophisticated mathematical tools, led to an earlier and more accurate understanding of the cosmos. Copernicus, if he even existed in this exact form, would have stood on the shoulders of giants whose work was far more comprehensive. The heliocentric model, instead of being a revolutionary and controversial idea, might have emerged more gradually from the ongoing refinement of astronomical data. Medical knowledge also advanced at an accelerated pace. The works of Galen and Hippocrates were not merely preserved, but constantly built upon through centuries of clinical observation and experimentation. Dissection and anatomical studies were conducted with greater regularity, leading to a much earlier and more precise understanding of human physiology. The concept of germ theory, for instance, might have been theorized centuries earlier, mitigating the impact of devastating plagues and improving public health on a global scale. Public sanitation, disease prevention, and even rudimentary surgical techniques would have seen earlier and more widespread adoption. The development of the printing press in this alternate timeline might have been an evolution rather than a revolution. While Gutenberg's innovation in our world democratized knowledge, in this reality, the Library of Alexandria might have already pioneered more efficient methods of mass textual reproduction. Perhaps a form of woodblock printing, or even an early movable type system was developed within its scriptoria much earlier, driven by the sheer demand for copies of its vast collection. If Gutenberg did invent the printing press, he did so into a world already primed for mass literacy, a world where the hunger for knowledge was already ravenous due to the enduring legacy of the library. The spread of ideas would have been even faster, leading to a more rapid diffusion of scientific discoveries and philosophical concepts across continents. The age of exploration would have been profoundly different. Imagine navigators equipped not just with rudimentary maps, but with sophisticated cartographic knowledge, drawing upon centuries of accumulated geographical data from Alexandrian scholars. Astronomical navigation would have been far more precise. The discovery of the Americas, for example, might have occurred under different circumstances, perhaps by expeditions with a deeper scientific purpose, leading to interactions with indigenous peoples that were less exploitative and more rooted in mutual curiosity. As explorers sought to document and integrate new knowledge into the library's expanding archives, the concept of a global interconnectedness, driven by the exchange of knowledge, would have taken root much earlier. Philosophy, too, would have taken distinct turns. the unbroken chain of philosophical inquiry, from the pre-Socratics through Hellenistic and Roman thought, and then integrated with Islamic and later European perspectives, would have created a richer, more nuanced intellectual landscape. Many of the schisms and intellectual cul-de-sacs of our history, born of rediscovered texts and incomplete understanding, might have been avoided. Concepts like human rights, scientific method, and democratic governance could have evolved more coherently and found earlier, more widespread acceptance, perhaps leading to societies that were more enlightened and equitable. Consider the societal impact. A world where knowledge was continuously valued, preserved, and disseminated on such a grand scale would likely foster a greater respect for learning and intellectual pursuit. Education would have been a more central pillar of society, accessible to a broader segment of the population. Illiteracy rates would have plummeted centuries ago. The very fabric of society, from governance to daily life, would be permeated by a rational, evidence-based approach, fostering innovation and progress. Instead of cycles of ignorance and enlightenment, there would have been a steady, accelerating upward trajectory of human understanding. The arts would have also been influenced. Writers and poets, with access to a broader range of historical and mythological narratives, as well as philosophical insights, would have created works of unparalleled depth and complexity. Architects, engineers, and artists, informed by a continuous tradition of knowledge and innovation, would have pushed the boundaries of human creativity further and faster. Imagine Gothic cathedrals with even more sophisticated engineering, or Renaissance art infused with a deeper understanding of human anatomy and perspective, drawing directly from Alexandrian treatises. The enduring presence of the library would have created a global intellectual commons. While political boundaries and conflicts would undoubtedly still exist, the shared pursuit of knowledge, centered around Alexandria, would foster a deeper sense of interconnectedness among the world's diverse cultures. Scholars would cross borders with greater ease, united by their dedication to learning. The very notion of lost knowledge would be largely foreign, replaced by a constant process of accumulation, refinement, and dissemination. Even the languages we speak might be different. Latin and Greek, constantly in use and evolving within the library's multilingual environment, might have diverged less drastically, or perhaps a universal scholarly language, based on the library's extensive lexicons, might have emerged, facilitating even greater intellectual exchange. The very way we think about knowledge, its ephemeral nature, its fragility, would be fundamentally altered. In this reality, the fall of empires, the rise of new powers, and the ebb and flow of human history would still occur. But each transition, instead of being a potential setback for knowledge, would be an opportunity for new patrons, new perspectives, and new contributions to the ever-growing storehouse of human understanding. The library would have become a testament to humanity's enduring desire to learn, to question, and to understand the universe around us. Its survival would not just be the preservation of ancient texts, but the preservation of a mindset, a commitment to intellectual curiosity that would ripple through the ages, shaping a world far more informed, far more advanced, and perhaps even a little more wise than our own. The very concept of a dark age in Europe, a period often characterized by intellectual stagnation and a decline in learning, might have been significantly mitigated or even bypassed entirely. The constant flow of information from Alexandria would have acted as a continuous infusion of knowledge, preventing the deep intellectual troughs that occurred in our timeline. Monasteries across Europe, rather than painstakingly copying a limited set of texts, would have had access to a much broader and more diverse collection, fostering a more vibrant intellectual life. Consider the potential for technological innovation. While our timeline saw fits and starts, with many ingenious inventions lost to time or rediscovered much later in this reality. The library's presence would have provided a central repository for technical drawings, scientific observations, and engineering principles. The knowledge of Archimedes, hero of Alexandria, and countless other ancient inventors would have been continuously studied, refined, and applied. Imagine steam power being widely understood and potentially utilized in rudimentary ways centuries before the Industrial Revolution, or complex mechanical devices becoming commonplace far earlier. The very trajectory of human technological progress would have been profoundly accelerated. This accelerated progress would not necessarily lead to utopia. Of course, human nature, with its inherent flaws and tendencies towards conflict, would still exist. Wars would still be fought, empires would rise and fall, and societal injustices would still manifest. However, the solutions to these problems might have been sought with a greater reliance on reason, empathy, and collective knowledge. Diplomacy might have been more sophisticated, legal systems more just, and public discourse more informed. The interconnectedness fostered by the library would also have a profound impact on global cultural exchange. Instead of cultures developing largely in isolation, a constant cross-pollination of ideas, artistic styles, and philosophical concepts would have occurred. Imagine Greek drama influencing Chinese opera, or Indian mathematical concepts directly shaping European music theory centuries earlier. The richness of human culture would have been amplified, leading to new forms of expression and understanding. The library itself would have evolved. It wouldn't just be a static collection of scrolls and books. It would be a dynamic, living institution, employing thousands of scholars, scribes, and conservators. It might have even developed early forms of information retrieval systems, perhaps complex cataloging methods, or even rudimentary mechanical devices for accessing and cross-referencing information. Its influence would extend far beyond its physical walls, with scholars traveling to disseminate its knowledge and bring back new discoveries from distant lands. The sheer volume of preserved knowledge would also necessitate new forms of intellectual specialization. Scholars would delve deeply into increasingly narrow fields, leading to the early development of distinct scientific disciplines and academic departments. This specialization, however, would be balanced by the library's overarching mission of integrating knowledge, ensuring that experts in one field could easily access and understand the findings of others. The absence of a dark age would mean that the philosophical debates of the ancient world would continue uninterrupted, evolving and adapting to new discoveries and societal changes. The works of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics would not be mere historical curiosities, but living philosophical traditions constantly reinterpreted and applied to contemporary issues. This continuous intellectual engagement would likely lead to a more profound and widespread understanding of ethics, governance, and the human condition. Even the perception of time itself might be different. With such a vast and accessible historical record, humanity might have a deeper and more nuanced understanding of its past, recognizing patterns, learning from mistakes, and building upon successes with greater foresight. The sense of an unbroken chain of human endeavor, stretching back into antiquity, would be palpable, fostering a deeper sense of continuity and collective purpose. Furthermore, consider the impact on religious development. With access to a more comprehensive array of philosophical and historical texts, religious doctrines might have evolved with greater flexibility and a more pronounced emphasis on intellectual inquiry. While faith would still play a crucial role, dogmatism might have been tempered by a culture of open debate and textual analysis fostered by the library. Heresies and schisms, while not entirely absent, might have been approached with greater scholarly rigor and less violent repression. The very concept of interfaith dialogue might have emerged centuries earlier, as scholars from different religious backgrounds encountered and engaged with each other's sacred texts and theological arguments within the neutral, academic space of the library. This could have fostered a world with less religious persecution and more harmonious coexistence, driven by a shared intellectual curiosity rather than entrenched ideological divides. The development of democracy and political thought would also see a profound acceleration. Ancient Greek political treatises, constantly studied and debated, would have directly influenced Roman legal thought and, subsequently, the emerging political structures of Europe and the Islamic world. Concepts of citizenship, public service, and individual rights might have been refined and institutionalized much earlier, leading to more stable and representative forms of government. The idea of a meritocracy, where positions of power were granted based on intellectual prowess and administrative skill rather than solely on birth or military might have gained significant traction, drawing from the library's model of intellectual excellence. Revolutions, when they occurred, might have been less violent, driven by reasoned arguments and a societal capacity for intellectual reform, rather than by sheer desperation or ideological rigidity. The library's immense collection of cartography and geographical knowledge would have transformed global understanding. Instead of relying on myth and fragmented reports, explorers and traders would have possessed an increasingly accurate and detailed understanding of the world's continents, oceans, and trade routes. This precision would not only have made exploration safer and more efficient, but would also have fostered a truly global economy much earlier. Imagine vast mercantile networks spanning continents, facilitated by accurate navigation and a shared understanding of global resources. This could have led to an earlier and more equitable distribution of wealth, fostering greater economic stability across different regions. The arts and sciences would have become more deeply intertwined. For instance, the detailed anatomical knowledge preserved and expanded at Alexandria would not only benefit medicine, but also revolutionize art. Renaissance artists, instead of having to rediscover human anatomy through illicit dissections, would have had centuries of detailed anatomical drawings and treatises at their disposal, leading to an even more realistic and nuanced portrayal of the human form in painting and sculpture. Similarly, mathematical principles, continuously refined, would have permeated architecture and engineering and even music composition to a far greater degree, leading to more complex and harmonious creations. The impact on education would be monumental. The library would serve as the ultimate university, a model for countless smaller institutions that would spring up across the world, all drawing from its intellectual wealth. Education would not be limited to the elite or the clergy. Instead, the pursuit of knowledge would become a widely respected and attainable goal for a much larger segment of society. Public libraries, inspired by Alexandria, would likely have become common much earlier, bringing the printed word and access to information closer to everyday people. This universal access to education would have empowered individuals, fostering critical thinking and an informed citizenry, leading to more robust and resilient societies. Even the way we think about history itself would be altered. With an unbroken, meticulously preserved historical record, generations would have a direct connection to the past. The study of history would be less about interpreting fragmented clues, and more about engaging with a continuous, evolving narrative. This deeper historical understanding would provide profound insights into human behavior, societal dynamics, and the long-term consequences of decisions, potentially leading to more enlightened approaches to contemporary challenges. The lessons of the past would be less likely to be forgotten, and historical cycles of error might be broken. The presence of the library would also lead to an earlier development of scientific methodology. The rigorous empirical observation logical deduction, and systematic experimentation that characterize modern science might have been formalized and widely adopted centuries earlier. The continuous accumulation of data and the constant re-evaluation of theories, central to the scientific process, would be a core principle fostered by the library's scholarly environment. This would not only accelerate scientific discovery, but also instill a more rational and evidence-based approach to problem-solving in all aspects of life. Finally, consider the concept of progress itself. In our timeline, progress often feels like a series of breakthroughs, sometimes followed by setbacks or periods of stagnation. In a world where the Library of Alexandria never fell, progress would be more like a steadily climbing curve, an unbroken ascent of human understanding and capability. While challenges and conflicts would still arise, the tools to address them, knowledge, reason, and an interconnected global community of scholars, would be far more sophisticated and readily available. The human story in this alternate reality would be one of continuous intellectual a testament to the power of preserved knowledge and the enduring human spirit of inquiry. The enduring Alexandrian meridian, charting a different course for humanity. Let's delve deeper into the specific ways the unbroken intellectual current from Alexandria would reshape the very fabric of global civilization, influencing everything from daily life to the grand narratives of empires. The continuous study of engineering and urban planning at the library would mean that cities worldwide would develop far more sophisticated infrastructures centuries ahead of our timeline. Roman aqueducts, already engineering marvels, would be continuously refined and integrated with advanced hydraulic systems, potentially leading to widespread piped water and sewage systems in major urban centers by the late classical or early medieval period. Imagine ancient Alexandria, always a marvel, becoming a blueprint for other cities, featuring advanced ventilation, climate control through ingenious architectural design, and even early forms of public transport powered by refined mechanical principles. The very experience of living in an urban environment would be cleaner, healthier, and more efficient, mitigating many of the disease outbreaks and sanitation crises that plagued historical cities. The impact on agriculture and food security would be profound. Roman agricultural treatises, combined with Egyptian irrigation techniques and later Islamic advancements in agronomy, would be continuously studied and improved upon. New crop rotation methods, more efficient tools, and a deeper understanding of soil science and plant genetics would emerge much earlier. This accelerated agricultural innovation would lead to increased food yields, reducing the incidence of famine and supporting larger, healthier populations. The global exchange of crops and agricultural knowledge would be much faster, meaning new staples and cultivation techniques spread rapidly, enriching diets and preventing localized food shortages from escalating into widespread crises. The very malfusion pressures that often shaped history in our timeline would be significantly alleviated. Think about the legal and judicial systems. The Corpus Juris Civilis of Justinian, compiled with the full resources of the library, would be an even more comprehensive and intellectually robust document. But beyond this, the continuous study of legal philosophy, comparative law from various cultures, and the vast historical record of legal disputes would lead to the development of more equitable, transparent, and universally applicable legal principles much earlier. The evolution towards concepts like innocent until proven guilty, due process, and codified rights would be accelerated. This would foster societies with greater personal freedoms and a stronger rule of law, impacting everything from criminal justice to international trade agreements. Disputes between nations might be more frequently resolved through arbitration and legal precedent, backed by the library's comprehensive legal archives. Rather than resorting to armed conflict, The advancement of materials science would also be extraordinary. While the ancients already had remarkable command over materials like bronze, iron, and glass, the continuous scientific inquiry fostered by the library would push these boundaries further. Imagine early forms of metallurgy being understood at a chemical level, leading to stronger, lighter alloys centuries earlier. The properties of ceramics, textile, and even rudimentary plastics might have been explored and utilized for practical applications, long before their historical emergence. This would impact everything from construction techniques and manufacturing processes to the development of more durable tools and sophisticated weaponry. Ideally, the advanced diplomacy would mitigate the latter's widespread use. Consider the development of complex machines and automation. Hero of Alexandria's steam engine, often dismissed as a toy in our timeline, would be a subject of continuous study and refinement. With a consistent intellectual environment dedicated to understanding mechanical principles, early forms of automation could have emerged in various industries. Imagine water-powered factories, or even rudimentary clockwork mechanisms being applied to repetitive tasks, freeing up human labor for more intellectual or creative pursuits. The Industrial Revolution, when it did occur, would be a gradual, organic evolution from centuries of accumulated mechanical knowledge, rather than a sudden, disruptive upheaval. It might be less reliant on fossil fuels and more on sustainable, anciently understood power sources like hydro and wind, guided by an earlier understanding of environmental impacts. The impact on philosophy and ethics would be profound. The continuous and interconnected lineage of thought, from ancient Greek ethics to Roman Stoicism, through Islamic philosophical inquiries and into the European Enlightenment, would mean that ethical dilemmas and societal values would be constantly re-examined and refined. Concepts of universal human dignity, interconnectedness, and global citizenship might have emerged earlier and with greater consensus. Philosophical movements would not be isolated currents, but part of a grand, ongoing dialogue. This could lead to a world where humanitarian principles are more deeply ingrained in political systems and cultural norms, leading to greater social justice and a reduction in systemic inequalities. The library would also act as a global clearinghouse for intelligence and information. Imagine a system where envoys and scholars routinely exchanged reports on distant lands. Not just political or military intelligence, but detailed accounts of geography, flora, fauna, cultures, and technologies. This would lead to an unprecedented level of global awareness and understanding. Misinformation and prejudice, while never entirely absent, would face a constant challenge from a vast body of verified knowledge. This global information network would facilitate trade, cultural exchange, and scientific collaboration on a scale unimaginable in our own history. The very concept of public discourse and critical thinking would be elevated. With widespread literacy and easy access to diverse perspectives, populations would be more informed and less susceptible to demagoguery or propaganda. Debates on public policy, philosophical questions, and scientific theories would be conducted with a greater degree of intellectual rigor, fostering a more engaged and discerning citizenry. This could lead to more stable and adaptable political systems, capable of responding to challenges with reasoned deliberation rather than reactive emotionalism. Even warfare, tragically, would be different. While conflicts might still arise, the advancements in science and engineering would lead to more sophisticated military technologies. However, the greater emphasis on diplomacy, shared knowledge, and a global intellectual common ground might lead to fewer, shorter, and less destructive wars. The horrors of large-scale conflicts might be understood and avoided more effectively, as the vast historical records of the library would clearly illustrate the long-term devastating consequences of protracted warfare. Perhaps even the very act of war would become so technically sophisticated and costly that it would be reserved only as a last resort, debated endlessly within scholarly circles before any action was taken. Finally, the spirit of discovery and exploration would never wane. Beyond geographical exploration, the library would foster a continuous intellectual exploration of the universe. Imagine early forms of telescopes being refined to greater magnifications, leading to earlier discoveries of planets and celestial mechanics. The study of the microcosm through rudimentary microscopes could reveal the invisible world of bacteria and cells far earlier. This relentless push against the frontiers of knowledge, fueled by an ever-growing repository of information, would define humanity's trajectory. The Alexandrian spirit, a blend of empirical observation, philosophical inquiry, and practical application, would become the defining characteristic of global civilization, shaping a world that is always learning, always adapting, and always reaching for new heights of understanding. The Alexandrian Golden Age. Humanity unleashed. The persistent influence of the library would usher in what could truly be called an Alexandrian Golden Age, a period not confined to a few centuries, but a continuous flourishing of human intellect and innovation that would extend to the modern era. This would dramatically alter the timeline of major historical events. We know, for instance, the Reformation might play out very differently, with a more nuanced understanding of theological texts and a longer tradition of open intellectual debate. Religious reform might be less schismatic and more collaborative, rather than splintering into numerous denominations with often violent conflicts. Theological discussions could lead to a more unified, intellectually robust, and less dogmatic Christianity, or indeed other faiths, that is more adaptable to scientific discovery. The persecution of scientists like Galileo, for example, might be averted entirely, as the intellectual establishment would be far more accustomed to challenging established views with empirical evidence. The Age of Enlightenment would not be a radical departure from a period of darkness, but rather an acceleration of trends already well underway. Thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, and Voltaire would have centuries of advanced political philosophy and empirical social science to draw upon. Their ideas on governance, liberty, and human rights would be more sophisticated, drawing from a broader base of historical case studies and philosophical arguments. This could lead to a global society where representative governance, with checks and balances, becomes the norm much earlier, potentially preventing many of the autocratic regimes and large-scale oppressions that marked our history. The very concept of global governance and international cooperation would emerge with greater urgency and sophistication. With the library acting as a de facto global intellectual parliament, the idea of nations working together for common scientific, health, and economic goals would be deeply ingrained. Treaties and international organizations might emerge, not out of the ashes of devastating wars, but from a shared understanding of interconnectedness and a proactive drive to solve global challenges through collective intelligence. This could lead to a world with a much stronger framework for peace, disease prevention, and resource management. Consider the technological leap to the information age. While we experienced a digital revolution in the late 20th century, in this reality, the foundational work in logic, mathematics, and even early mechanical computing would have begun millennia ago. Ancient Greek and Islamic scholars, with continuous access to the library's vast resources and a culture that celebrated ingenious mechanical devices, might have conceptualized and even built rudimentary computing machines centuries before Babbage. The transition to advanced information processing would be a seamless, gradual evolution, perhaps leading to a form of sophisticated, analog-based information network long before the advent of electricity, influencing everything from complex financial systems to global communication. The space age would likely dawn much earlier and with a fundamentally different philosophical underpinning, with Ptolemy's astronomical work continuously refined and built upon. The understanding of celestial mechanics would be far more advanced. The moon and planets would be seen not just as distant lights, but as tangible destinations for scientific inquiry. Instead of a Cold War race to the moon, humanity's journey to the stars might be a collaborative, international effort driven purely by scientific curiosity, with the library's extensive astrophysical knowledge guiding every step. Imagine humanity establishing permanent lunar outposts for astronomical observation by the early modern period, and perhaps even sending probes to Mars by the 18th or 19th century. The arts would reflect this continuous intellectual growth in breathtaking ways. Music, for instance, would incorporate complex mathematical theories and advanced acoustics much earlier, leading to entirely new genres and instruments. Visual arts would not only master realism but delve into abstract and conceptual forms with greater philosophical depth, drawing inspiration from quantum physics or psychological insights that emerged centuries ahead of our time. Architecture would fuse ancient aesthetics with advanced engineering, creating structures of unparalleled beauty, efficiency, and sustainability, seamlessly integrating with natural environments. The social structures of this world would also be profoundly different. With widespread education and a culture valuing intellectual contribution, societal hierarchies might be less rigid, based more on merit and intellectual achievement than on inherited wealth or social status. The role of women in intellectual life, for example, might be far more prominent, with figures like Hypatia being the norm rather than the tragic exception, leading to earlier advancements in gender equality. The very concept of human potential would be maximized, as talent would be identified and nurtured from all segments of society, regardless of background. Finally, the environmental consciousness would be inherent in this advanced civilization. With centuries of accumulated scientific data on climate, ecosystems, and human impact, the perils of unchecked industrialization or resource depletion would be understood far earlier. This would lead to the development of sustainable technologies and practices from the outset, perhaps averting many of the ecological crises that face our world today. Humanity would have learned to live in greater harmony with its planet, guided by the wisdom accumulated and disseminated by the enduring library. The pursuit of knowledge would inherently include the knowledge of preservation and sustainability. In sum, a world where the Library of Alexandria survived isn't just a world with more books. It is a world where the human mind itself was continuously cultivated and allowed to reach its fullest potential without the crushing weight of lost wisdom. It's a world where the intellectual journey of humanity has been an unbroken, accelerating ascent, shaping a civilization that is not only vastly more advanced technologically and scientifically, but also more enlightened, more equitable, and deeply wise. And so, we conclude our journey into this other history, a world shaped by the enduring light of the Library of Alexandria. Let your imagination drift now, carried by the thought of what could have been, and how a single, preserved beacon of knowledge might have transformed the tides of time.